My name's Howard Plattner, and today is the 6th of June of 2007. It's probably about 4:03. I don't know what time it is. It's in the afternoon. We're at the Lowell Library, and
this is his interview.
Introduce yourself too.
I'm Katie Slatton. Alright, so Howard Plattner, you were in Vietnam War, and we're going to start with where you were born.
okay, I was born in Sabetha, Kansas, which is a little town in northeast Kansas. There were 13 students in my high school class, and I remember I was in the top half because I was number 6. I was not a very good student in high school. And so I have 3 brothers. 2 brothers are older and 2 brothers are younger, and they still live in Sabetha, Kansas, and they don't want to leave Sabetha, Kansas. They want to stay in Sabetha, Kansas.
Where did you live in? Did you live in the country or the city?
Yeah, we had a dairy farm. We had
Oh.
milk cows and feed the chickens. Yeah.
So you had daily chores.
Oh yes. Yeah. In fact, we had to do the chores before we went to the games. We'd go home from school and we'd do the chores and then go back to the games.
What kind of games?
Well, like football games or basketball games.
Were you guys involved in sports a lot?
Yeah, I was.
Alright. What was the name of the school that you went to?
It's called Bern, Kansas. B-E-R-N, Kansas. Yeah. It's still there. We still have a school, and the last class that just graduated had 12 students. So
Oh.
it's not getting too much smaller. Yeah.
What was life like in your family?
Well, we were farmers, and so we always had chores to do. There was always cows to milk, and there was always things. Since I didn't have any sisters, I did a lot of washing dishes, and my mom made us help do those things. I worked in the garden a lot, and then and I wasn't a very good student because I thought I would probably not leave Sabetha, Kansas. My address was Sabetha, but I went to another school called Bern, Kansas. That's why it seemed like a discrepancy. But we worked all the time. We didn't have a lot of money. I would say we'd probably be socioeconomically, we were probably pretty poor. We were, yeah. But that was okay. We had plenty of food, and that was fine.
Did you get involved with the military as soon as you graduated?
Well, I graduated in 1968, which they still had the draft, and I don't know if you remember from history where people would burn their draft cards. I don't know if you know that, but they did burn their draft cards, and they would go to Canada. But you had to register with the Selective Service if you were 18-year-old male. So I did that, and then there were things called deferments. If you were married, you got a deferment. If you were in college, you got a deferment. And some people got deferments because of hardships. Well, I didn't get a deferment. And so that was it. I graduated in May of 1968, and then in October of 1969, I got drafted. You get this letter from your Selective Service office. Dear Howard Plattner, you have been chosen to enlist in the USA Army. So I got drafted in 1969 in November. And you could enlist in the Air Force, which was 4 years, or you could enlist in the Navy, which was 4 years. But if you got drafted by the Army, it was 2 years. And so I got drafted and went to Kansas City, Missouri, and that's where it was processed. And then I was sent to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And then I went to Fort Sam Houston, Texas for my training.
I see. When did you get sent to Vietnam?
Well, you do your basic training, and then I was an operating room technician. I handled the scalpels and hemostats to the surgeons during surgery. So I kind of happened into this situation. I didn't even know what a scrub technician was. It's a technical job, but you learn you pass instruments and you do surgery. This is kind of nifty. So you're up there, and then I went to Fort Ord, California for 6 months because they train you there. And then after I was done, I was sent to Vietnam in August of 1970.
When you were in California, did you ever go through boot camp?
No, I had done that. You had done that before. You go through basic training, and then you go to advanced individual training, and then you go to a little bit more advanced training, and then you're trained, and then you go wherever they send you.
Do you remember your instructors at all?
Oh no. I just remember they yelled a lot. It was pretty much like the movies that they yell at you and they make you do push-ups and they try to intimidate you. But you know what? I thought, I'm smarter than these guys and I'll just do it. So I could do it for two months, you know, I could do that, yeah. But I don't have any idea who they were.
I probably don't want to remember.
No, I
either.
didn't. They were okay, but I kind of separated myself from that.
Right. Where in Vietnam were you sent?
Well, it was called Chu It's capital C-H-U and then capital L-A-I. It's clear up in the northern part of Vietnam. Maybe 100 miles from the DMZ. Do you know what the DMZ is? It's the demilitarized zone. It's separated North Vietnam from South Vietnam, so I was clear up north. And Saigon was way down south, so I was long. Saigon was the capital of South Vietnam, and so I was a long ways from there.
What kind of village was Chu Lai?
It was a fishing village, and they did also some farming. So it was a very poor. They did have a school, but it was a very poor area. Yes.
What were the people like there? Like the native?
Well, the locals, they were, you know what, they didn't really want this war. And so if they could get their rice and if they could get their, you know what they liked? The women liked menthol cigarettes. Yeah, they did. Something about, because a lot of people smoked in the Third World and they would roll their cigarettes. And so there was these women that would help like clean the compound. And so they'd ask me for a cigarette. I didn't smoke, but I would buy menthol cigarettes. Were always so appreciative of that, yeah. But they worked hard. They were hardworking people, but they just barely subsisted. They did. They had usually large families. They could speak, but most of them didn't really care to learn English.
So communication was not so difficult?
You could talk to them, yeah. They could communicate what they wanted, what they wanted, yeah.
What were the daily conditions like?
Well, it depends what time of the season. During the hot season, remember there was no air conditioning, and we lived in these huts, these steel huts, and it was like 100 and 105 degrees every day. There was no air conditioning, and you had to keep the windows closed because it was in surgery. So it was very hot, and then the smell. If you ever travel to a foreign country, particularly in a rural area, there are just the smells, just the the waste. Products aren't put away and people smell because they sweat and they don't take baths every day or showers maybe once a week. So it's just a lot of, I just remember the heat and I remember the smells. And then during the monsoon season it rained every day. It would rain like 2 or 3 hours every day. It just rained and rained and rained.
Were the winters kind of more pleasant, or
there were no winters. It was summer the whole time.
Oh.
You look at Vietnam where it is from the equator. It's all, there was no winter. There was no spring. It was just always either the monsoon season or the hot season. Yeah. But they needed that for rice because they grew a lot of rice, and so they would have when it rained. It was good for the rice, the rainy season. Yeah, and then you had a dry season when they would harvest the rice. Yeah.
And what branch of the service did you say you were in?
Army.
Oh, Army. Did your unit specialize in anything besides just medical?
It was an evacuation hospital, which was right on the. If you look in your geography book, it's right along the South China Sea. So our hospital was right there. We had a helipad where they bring in the wounded people, and then we had the receiving area, and then you had 4 operating rooms. And so they would come into the receiving area. They'd be triaged. They'd stabilize and then they'd come to surgery. And so we did, people get shot in the head, so we did neurosurgery, we did vascular surgery, we did general surgery, we did a lot of orthopedic surgery, did ENT surgery where they would have their jaw broken. So we did all kinds of surgery, except we didn't deliver babies or anything like that.
What did you personally do?
Well, what I did, you would have somebody who was shot. Okay, say his leg was shot, injured, and so they'd bring the patient into the operating room, and anesthesia would put the patient to sleep, and then you would wash the wound, and then you would it was all under sterile conditions, and there was just you and the surgeon. This would be an orthopedic surgeon, and so then you would start exploring the wound to see if there was any damage to nerves or blood vessels, if there was any broken bones, and then you would, like debris, you'd have devitalized tissue, which is tissue that is non-viable, and so you would remove that, and then you would you could suture them together because it was a dirty wound, and then you would send them to the recovery room, and then they would go to the ward, and then they would get you back to Japan or back to America. Yeah.
Do you remember any humorous or slightly unusual events that may have happened?
Well, yeah, there was. Do you know what napalm is?
Yeah.
Okay, they used napalm over there, and it was a horrible thing. But they would drop it on people, and it was like jelly that was burning, you know. And so they would drop it on these people, and so they brought this person in had napalm still on them, and so the surgeon picked it up because he was doing surgery. He picked it up, and it got hot, so he dropped it onto another part of the body. And the surgeon said, "Hey, get that out of here!" But because it was hot, so it seems a little weird, but it was kind of, it's like, get this stuff away from you. Yeah. But it was usually pretty sober because they were mostly young people, young men who were getting injured, or were they would lose their leg or something like that. And I always say, what, he's the same age I am, gee whiz, I was always kind of, I was glad that I was not injured or anything like that. I never did get injured.
What was the best part about July? If you had to pick one thing.
Oh, I think it was probably the people I worked with. They were real dedicated people. You have to understand, there were surgeons who had gone to 4 years of medical school. Or they'd gone to 4 years of pre-med, then they'd gone to 4 years of medical school. That's 8 years, and they had done a 4-year residency. So they were been trained for 12 years, and guess what happened to them? They got sent to Vietnam. And so they had to do their 2 years over there, and they had bad attitudes, but they were very dedicated to the. You see movies about the war. They're not very.
They've been Hollywoodized.
Yeah. And so they were very good surgeons. And you would work some days you'd work 20 hours a day because these injured people kept coming in, and you just work and work until you were done. Yeah.
Did you keep in touch with your family?
Back in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the only way you could do it is write, because we didn't have email and you couldn't call, so all you did was write letters. Yeah, that's the only, and that's the only way I could communicate with my family.
Did you make many friendships with the people you worked with in July?
You mean the locals or the Americans?
Either or.
Well, I had some good friends who were Vietnamese, but then in 1972 when Vietnam fell, I think, I don't know what happened to those people. And as far as Americans that I worked with, we had this list that was going to have soldierings, but I never did go. I just got busy doing other things.
Yeah. Do you remember the day that your service ended?
Oh, yeah. What you do, you take a calendar. When you go over there, you take a calendar, and you knew you had to spend a year over there. So you start counting back. And then I remember because I got out in August, so I think I got out August 21st. So July 21st, I remember writing down 30 days, and every time a day went by, I'd cross off that day, and pretty soon it was August 21st. Yeah, I was done. Yeah. And so then they take you and they fly you to Japan, and then you fly back to America. Yeah.
What was the first thing you did once you got back?
Well, when you got back, they always gave you a good meal. They gave you anything. The Army, they gave you any kind of meal you want. And we got back like about 2 o'clock in the morning. And they said, "What do you want to eat?" And I said, "I want steak and eggs." And so they gave me steak and eggs. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I bet that had to taste pretty good after
Yeah, it
being
was
in
good.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
Did you go to college when you got back?
I did. I went. I went 4 years to undergraduate school, and I used the GI Bill, and so which was a good deal. And then I went on to graduate school, and then I went to anesthesia school. So yeah, but the government paid for 6 years of it.
Wow. Where did you go to college?
Well, I went to Kansas State University.
So back to Kansas. And
Yeah, I stayed in Kansas. I went to Kansas, and then I finished up in Wichita State University, which is in Wichita, Kansas.
Did you say what you studied?
Anesthesia.
Oh, right.
Anesthesia, you should put people to sleep.
So it's the same thing you did in the war.
Well, no, I was a scrub technician in the war. I handled the instruments. The anesthesia were, they were over here. So I thought that was kind of nifty. This one anesthesia provider would let me do anesthesia. I didn't know anything about pharmacology. I didn't know anything about anatomy. But he said, you can do this anesthetic. So should I say this here on the thing?
It's okay.
I was no license or anything, but I did this anesthetic, I said, this is kind of nifty. So then I came back and went to college.
Wow.
I wanted someplace that was clean and warm, so I picked surgery.
What did you do that for your job now?
Yeah, I work at Hastings, and then I also work in Saginaw and Lansing. I just kind of do some freelancing there. Yeah, that's what I do.
Are you married?
Yeah.
When or how did you meet your wife?
Oh, I met her at a friend's house. Yeah, that was when I was in school. Yeah.
And do you have any kids?
Yeah, we have three. We have 3 boys and a girl. In fact, our oldest son went to Lowell and graduated. Our second oldest son went to Lowell and graduated. Our third child was Holly Plattner. I don't know if you know. I don't know her. She went to Lowell, and they all 3 graduated. And then we moved to Alto, and then our other son is in Caledonia.
Let's see. When and why did you move to Michigan?
Why?
Yeah.
Oh, I heard there was this place called Lowell, Michigan. I thought I would come up here. No, my brother-in-law lived in Battle Creek, and we came up here, and I liked the area. It isn't so hot and it isn't so dry, and I always kind of wanted to go to Michigan. And so there was a job that opened up in Ionia, so I went there. And you remember there was a teacher at your high school, and he said, if you move to this area, you want to send your kids to Lowell High School. That's what he said.
Wow.
And so that's why we came to Lowell. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add for the records, or?
Oh, you know what? Can I say anything?
Yeah.
You know what? I always tell students they need to do really well with their basic sciences, because when I didn't learn that much in high school, and then I was out, so I had to really study. I had to take some remedial courses in college. Yeah, because I just didn't know those things. But I decided I was going to do that, so, but it was hard. I didn't learn that much in high school.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, and
Okay.
I think this just about does it.
Sure.
All right. So.
Well, I just would like there was a few things that I'd like to share here. And one was the war in Vietnam, which was a very unpopular war during the Johnson and Nixon times. But when I was in Vietnam, you only got informed about the good part of the war. I didn't have any idea that there was all this anti-war activities going on college campuses. I had no idea that they were against the war. But that was okay. And actually, when I think about it, there was like an underground in the unit that we was at. There was an underground group of soldiers who were intent upon feeding information to the soldiers that was the truth. That was what you call the Armed Forces Network, which they played music, and it was all about the good that the war was doing, but it wasn't always the truth. And so there was this organization that was involved with trying to infiltrate the military, but it wasn't very successful. But I say that because when I came back from Vietnam, people were not, when I had, that was in 1971, and a lot of people wore long hair, and of course military people had short hair, and people, civilians would identify military people with short hair as being, and there were a lot of anti-military sentiment, but that was okay. This war, I think people seem to be against the war, but they seem to be very supportive of it. They have parades, and they have all these things, but that didn't happen when I came back from Vietnam. But that was okay. I do read the papers. I read the editorials. It's very interesting when people talk about war. What people who haven't been, it's interesting when people talk about a war who haven't been in a war. It's interesting that they give their ideas, but they're just not correct. And it's also interesting when you have somebody who has been involved in a war where you get used to like mortars going off, and you don't think you would get used to that. You get used to machine guns going off. You kind of get used to that, and then you think, well, it's a long ways away. And then you come home, and it's so very quiet. It's just like there wasn't all this noise that was going on. Helicopters flying over, and these various things. But it's interesting when you read. Do you read the editorials?
I do sometimes.
Okay, read the editorials. It's always interesting. People will say some things but they don't really know what they're talking about. But it makes good reading, and people buy it. So that I want to say that regarding the Vietnam War, contrasting with the war now. Another thing was in 1971 there were people who got in trouble with the law. It wasn't murder or anything like that, but they would give a choice. They'd say, look, you can be drafted in the Army or you can go to jail. So of course they got drafted. So there was a lot of young people over there. I was 20 years old. Let me just say this. Do you vote? You should vote. Because when I was over there, at that time you could not vote until you were 21 years old. And I was over there, I was 20 years old, and you couldn't vote. And I thought, this is kind of crazy that they can shoot me or shoot at me, but I can't vote. So then Nixon lowered it to age 18 to vote. So you really should vote, and everybody should vote. Put that plug in. But there were people, have you ever seen a dead person?
At a funeral.
Okay, but somebody, have you ever seen a dead person? Have you ever seen a dead person? No, most people, when you see, the first time you see a dead person, it's like, boy, this is like, I don't know what to do, particularly a young dead person who is the same age you are. It's kind of frightening, and that happened a lot, and so I would think about again these young men, and there weren't any women over there except officers, and there weren't very many women over there. It was mostly men, and a lot of young men would get their leg amputated, or they'd get their arm blown off, or they would have injury done to them, and so I always felt so fortunate that I never got injured when all these things were going on. But it was young, and one thing about young men, they're healthy, and they can lose a lot of blood and they don't die, as opposed to older people who can, they can lose blood volume and various things like that, and they don't have the cardiac reserve to live. I have to tell you about the Vietnam War. The medical community learned a lot about surgery during the Vietnam War, because they would bring these young men in, they would be injured, and within maybe 2 hours they were in surgery. Now in Iraq, I think it's within 30 minutes that they can have them in surgery. And so they saved a lot of people because they had multiple injuries, and they would bring, and they learned about fluid resuscitation, and the medical literature after the Vietnam War went a long way regarding treating of trauma of people. The Americans do it different than the French. And remember when Princess Diana died? I don't know. Do you know how Princess Diana died? What? Car accident. But you know what happened to her physiology? She had a torn pulmonary vein, which meant she lost a lot of blood, which meant she lost a lot of fluid. And the French people don't resuscitate with fluids as aggressive as the Americans do. And that was one thing that they had learned from the Vietnam War, to resuscitate these people with fluids. And as a result, there was less people dying. And so they did a lot of studies with all these young people who lost like 30% of their blood volume. They would lose it, and they would still live. And they would think, this is rather interesting, that these people with all this great blood loss would still live. And it was because of fluid resuscitation. And I wanted to share this. I had this friend who was from Peru. His name was Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper was that was his name, a little bitty guy, and he was a surgeon in the evacuation hospital at Chulai. So he came back to America, and he was in Chicago, and he was in charge of the Peruvian Medical Society. Very aggressive guy, really a good surgeon. And one of his friends was this anesthesiologist that I worked with in Kansas. His name was Dr. Trujillo. So on one of the meetings they had in Chicago, this Dr. Pepper showed his Vietnam slides. And in the Vietnam slides, there was a picture of myself. And so this Dr. Trujillo, who I worked with in Kansas, said, "Hey, Howard, I was at this meeting in Chicago and I saw your picture on the thing." And that was because he was doing a presentation on trauma. So that was kind of interesting that he would recognize me. So medically, they learned a lot regarding treatment of young people regarding that. Regarding surgery, we would be doing surgery and the lights would go off. I mean, you think about in these places, here you are doing this very tedious surgery, and boom, the lights would go off. And so, in operating rooms, I don't know if you've ever been in an operating room, but operating rooms don't have windows. And so when the lights would go off, guess what? It was dark. And you couldn't see anything. You couldn't see anything. So they would get like flashlights and they would shine over the surgeon's shoulder just to give light. You would have mortars they would shoot mortars in. During the monsoons, the sewers would back up. And so you'd have water in the operating room. But you just did those various things. Because it was less than ideal conditions. But you know what? Those people did well. They really did well.
And the people who lived in Vietnam were just adjusted to these strange conditions.
They were just, because we had a generator at the place that we worked at, and sometimes it would go out, or it would be hit, or something like that, and then you wouldn't have power. So I think what happened, and these people didn't have powers in their house. They had campfires, and at dark they went to bed because that was the only thing they could do. Yeah.
Wow.
And most of them didn't have cars. They rode bikes. They rode a lot of bikes. And another thing, during the war, when you have a war going on, you have the military, and of course the men are in the military, and the old people don't work. So guess who does most of the work during the war?
Women.
The women. Yeah, they do the building, they harvest the rice, they take care of the children, and they take care of the animals. Yeah, they do take care of the animals.
Wow.
And so the women did most of the work.
And there were a lot of livestock, like you said.
Well, they didn't have tractors. They had like water buffalo,
And had to pull
the plow,
thing.
And you know what? One time, these army guys can get kind of ornery, and so they just took their M16 and shot this water buffalo. Well, that's like taking your John Deere tractor and blowing it up, And so they were just being ornery, what people would do. But I always felt bad for that. I always had a heart for the Vietnamese people. I did. They didn't want the war. It wasn't really advantageous for them, and so they were just caught in the war.
Were they often welcoming to the soldiers?
Well, they knew how to work the system. They would they liked to they wanted a corrugated tin for their roofs. What tin is? Just regular tin that you put on a barn. Well, they had thatched roofs. You know what happened to thatched roofs? They leak. So they would sell all sorts of things to get the tin. They would bribe people to get tin so they would have a tin roof. Well, if you had a tin roof in Vietnam, that was very prestigious because your roof didn't leak, for one thing, and it could catch on fire, for another thing.
Yeah.
So the people they would know how to manipulate the system. They were pretty entrepreneurs, yeah.
And did you have a lot of soldiers who were injured but hung around the hospital?
No, if they were injured, they went to the ward, and then they were medevaced to Japan. they were stabilized. As soon as they were stabilized, they were sent to Japan, and then they would bring them back to America to have reconstructive surgeries. Because you would have like a lot of soft tissue wound, that had to have skin grafts, or you would have fractures that needed to be realigned, and you would have abdominal surgery that would they would need to have further care. Yeah. So they would evacuate them back to, well, I said America. They came to Japan, then they would go to Germany, and then sometimes they would go to America. Yeah. And then they would have a whole round of a series of surgeries for reconstructive surgery.
Right. And there were highs and lows of busyness and not
Yeah,
doing
during the
anything at all.
monsoon season. Actually, one of the biggest problems was people would get bored when they didn't do it, when they had TV. They did have a library, so you could read. So I played a lot of basketball and a lot of volleyball because that's the only thing you could do. We did have a basketball goal. And that's why people got into drugs, because there was just, there wasn't anything to do. I mean, it was just, you either worked or you didn't work.
Did the Vietnamese people ever get into the sports with you guys, or did you ever
No.
teach them?
No, they weren't that interested in that. They did like the Western wear. They liked the jeans and the sandals, the flip flops. Americans had those, and they liked those. They had the the Vietnamese type, which were they liked watches and things like sunglasses. They liked these American things.
And they just didn't have things like that?
No, they would usually barter for. I usually just gave. I just gave them to them. They liked Tide soap because they didn't have soap. They didn't have soap. And so in the exchange where you could buy things, they would bring. So I would give the women Tide soap. They liked Tide soap. Yeah.
Well, let's see. Can you cut it? I can't think of anything.
I'd like to add just a couple of things here. One is regarding my interaction with the locals, the Vietnamese people. And this one lady worked at the hospital. The American government would hire out Vietnamese people to give them money also. But let me say this. In Vietnam, you didn't have dollars. They had what you call APCs, American Payment Certificates, because if you ever travel anywhere in the world, people want dollars. They want dollar bills. Vietnamese, even in Iraq, they don't have dollars. And any time you travel, I don't know if you've ever traveled, or if you've gone to that EF thing, have you gone to Europe?
No, not
Do they
yet.
still do that?
Yeah.
Okay. People, other countries want a dollar. And so in Vietnam, you didn't have dollars. So you had these payments that you would get. And first of all, when I was over there, I had all my money sent I had it all sent to America because there wasn't anything you could do with money except I had a little bit that I got. And they paid you pretty good. They paid you overseas duty pay, they paid you hazardous duty pay, and they paid you, so you got paid reasonably well. In fact, a lot of people went to Vietnam, and some people go to Iraq for the money. Now that sounds kind of weird, but you could make, you didn't have any expenses,
Right.
and they would pay you this money. So I interacted with the people around. There was this one lady that worked at the hospital. She did cleaning in the hospital. So she invited me to her house for supper. And so I said, sure, I'll come in. Of course, it was a big thing because you have an American coming into their house. And it was probably not much bigger than this room, just a little bitty small house.
The whole house?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, people live very small. And so she boiled this rice, and then she had this delicacy, and so they were squid. They were about, because we lived next to the ocean, they were about that long. Of course, a squid is about this much as the body, and then you have the tentacles.
Right.
And I remember sitting there, and they still had the eyes in. I remember that, but they were all like boiled or something. And so the children laid these squid out there over the rice, and so I thought, what am I going to do? And the children would eat those squid, and so you know what, I couldn't do it. She appreciated it. I said, look, I just can't eat these squid. but it was apparently a delicacy. But I felt bad because she had invited me there and had gone to the market. Well, let me talk about the market. They didn't have refrigerators, so every day you went to the market. You went to the market every day.
Fresh food.
Fresh. Yeah. They had meat. I mean, they had meat that's just lying out there.
Wow.
Fish and pork, but no refrigeration. Well, you can imagine if you have meat, what you have with meat, you have lots of flies, and so these flies were all, and people bought this meat. You had fresh fruit, and then that was about so, and then you had a lot of green leafy vegetables. So every day people had to go to the market, and they would buy what they need, and then they would go back. Well, the marketplace was it was huge. I mean, it was probably half the size of the Lowell football field. All these vendors would bring in their, and the people would do that. And then they would go home at night. So I would go down there, and they would make trinkets and things like that. Well, they always wanted to sell to Americans, So I would buy, but every day you would go to the market, and that's what the women, they go to the market and then prepare the meal. I do want to address the thing about drugs. I don't know if you hear much about it during this war, but there was a problem with drugs. First of all, they were very available, and there was also the thing about drinking. There was a lot of idle time, so there was a problem. And I don't know, but the only thing you could drink was warm beer. They didn't have refrigeration, so if you drank beer, it was always warm beer. But it wasn't too bad, It wasn't that bad. But there was a lot of marijuana that was over there. There was a lot of heroin that was over there. And of course heroin has real rapid index of being habit forming. So these young guys would come over there, and of course, I didn't know what heroin was. This guy had this white powder. What is that? Hey man, that's heroin. And so they would inject it there, and then they could not function. And so the Army had a problem with these young men who were addicted to heroin. In fact, this one person was addicted to heroin. So the Army would, what they call it, 10-12, they would discharge him because they didn't really want to treat them. And so this person had like this was in 1971, he had a $1,200 heroin habit when he came back to America. I mean, he was addicted to it in Vietnam, and he would come back there. That was in 1971. So so these young people were, because it was very, very pure, and it was very, very dangerous. But there seemed to be a lot of that, and of course, a lot of marijuana was over there.
Right.
I never did get involved with it, and a lot of people smoked over there. There was a lot of people smoked like cigarettes, but I thought, I don't want to get that stuff in my lungs. Because I remember we were doing these thoracotomies, you'd see these people's lungs, and they would have all this tar in there from smoking. I don't think I want that, so I never did. But I was at the Lowell Fair one time, and I was walking by, and I don't know if you know this, but marijuana has a certain smell to it. It's like this real pungent smell, and I went and walked by this, and boy, I remember that smell, because you would smell it every day. But I do remember that.
And for the drinking, was it mainly because the water wasn't safe?
Well,
to drink,
no, it was
or
just that people were bored,
just
and there was a
because-
lot of anxiety. There were a lot of people. It was kind of frightening, and so, and they were away from their families. I wasn't married. You would be separated from your family for a whole year.
Yeah.
Some of these people, some of these young guys were just married, and they'd be separated from their family. They'd get lonely. You go I didn't know anybody in the unit, and it's kind of lonely, and if you don't make friends, you're kind of by yourself, and you kind of have to survive, and so there's a lot of temptations over there. Yeah.
I think that's good, actually.
Just one more thing that I would share, and that would be in the military. Military, it depends who you talk to. There's people who stay in the military for make careers out of it. It's for a young person, it's not that bad. I don't think I'd want to make a career out of it. But you have to learn discipline. You have to learn to take care of yourself. You have to learn to be responsible for it, because people don't do that. You have to learn to get along, to interact, because you know, even if there were people that you didn't really have good friendship with, you had to work with those people every day, because that's all that they were there. And these people were needing help, so you had to work. So you had to learn how to get along with people. And something about when there's this person out there who's trying to hurt you, friendships can be very, very good. Now, personally, I don't talk to any of the people that I was at my unit. I thought I would, but I never have. When I go places and work and they talk about Vietnam, I always ask where they were at. But I've never met anyone who was in my unit. I've never met anyone who was in my unit. And a lot of those surgeons, they were like 30 years old. So that was 30 years ago. So they're getting about ready to retire. They were like 60 years old. They say to make a career of the military, but if you like that sort of thing, but there's always a downside of the military. You know, you are the armies, and the military is different than the civilian life, and you can't just quit whenever you want to. But they made it much better now, I think. But when I was there, you didn't have to have a high school education, and so there were these marginal people, you know, who didn't graduate high school, and they had done this, like, they committed some sort of misdemeanor, so they were in the military, and they were there, and then they straightened up. But I learned that I didn't want to stay in the military for long. But you know what? I will say this: if I would have had to come back to America, I would have volunteered to go back to Vietnam. Because you read about young people in Iraq, they volunteer to go to Iraq, or they extend. Yeah. I would have done that. And in fact, if I would have got sent to Vietnam, I wanted to know what war was like. I really did. Now that sounds crazy, but I was 19 years old, and I thought, and I'd never been in any place except Sabetha, Kansas. I thought, I want to go out there and see what is going on. And so I would have volunteered to go to Vietnam. I would have told my mom, but I probably would have. Yeah.
Did you know what you wanted to do when you got out of high school? Like,
No,
career?
not really. No, I thought I'd probably farm or be an electrician. And then I found my niche, you know, and that's a credit to the Army. I knew what I wanted to do, and that was to come back and do anesthesia. So here I am. I think it'd be Lowell, Michigan.
Would you say that the military's changed from how it was when you were in it to now?
I think there's a mentality. Well, I think the military is, first of all, you have to have a high school education to get in. So I think they've upgraded a lot more, and it's more stringent than what it is. I don't think there's the harassment that you had when I was. They would harass you, officers, as opposed to non-enlisted people. Yeah, but I think it's probably better. I don't know if the morale is any better now or not, but I think the military is probably better.
The following oral military history project is a series of documentaries in association with the Lowell area men and women who proudly served and sacrificed part of their lives to preserve the opportunities for all of us to build our businesses and raise our families under a blanket of freedom. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-7688.